Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of On the Couch. This afternoon, we'll be discussing women and HIV. I'm very excited to be joined by a fantastic panel this afternoon who I will get around to introducing in just a moment. Welcome to the panel. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land upon which we all meet this afternoon. As I've already mentioned, if you haven't already, please feel free to drop the land, country or nation you're joining us from this afternoon into the chat box. We'd really appreciate that. This afternoon, I'm coming to you from Yuin country, land of Wadi Wadi Wandandian people here on the beautiful south coast of New South Wales. Caddyshack Project would like to acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, and welcome any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander participants with us this afternoon. We acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and as we sit here this afternoon learning, may we also acknowledge the learning that forever happened within the Aboriginal custodianship of country. I do think it's important to recognise that we are joining this webinar this afternoon with various personal and professional hats. As always, Caddyshack Project recommend that you practice self-care throughout today's webinar and do whatever you need to do to feel safe throughout this afternoon's discussions. We're literally sometimes coming to you from on the couch, and we hope that you are comfortable with a cup of tea or, a nice glass of water for the afternoon as we settle into the next hour together of meaningful discussions around women and HIV in the Australian context. In regards to self-care, if you haven't already, we do recommend a previous webinar we've done with Chris Cheers, a psychologist based down in Victoria. Chris not only speaks about the concept of self-care, but also that of community care. And we really encourage listening to that webinar and, focusing on your self-care, because it's not something that we always get the time to do. We think about it professionally, but not always personally. So without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure this afternoon to welcome Naomi Hoffman, Tasha and Mel from Positive Speakers Bureau as we discuss women and HIV. So good afternoon all.
Hi.
Good afternoon.
Before I throw to each of you to hear your own unique and wonderful journeys, I'd just like to do a brief bio. So Tasha has been a speaker with the Positive Speakers Bureau since 2015 and is the Director of Positive Life New South Wales Board for the past 6 years.
A director.
A director. Oh, multiple directors. That's exciting.
On the board. But yes, this will be my last year after several years of doing it. I'm just going to have a little bit of a break.
Oh, excellent. Tasha brings a unique perspective on the challenges and lived experience of someone being both transgender and living with HIV. Her background is in education, with 14 years experience teaching senior high school in both Australia and overseas. She has been HIV positive since 2008. Welcome, Tasha. Melissa. Mel is a young woman living with HIV of African descent who is on the board at Positive Life New South Wales, as well as being a speaker with Positive Life Speakers Bureau. She is passionate about her family and hopes to one day leave an impact behind for women living with HIV. Welcome, Mel. And last but certainly not least, we have Naomi Hoffman, or Nay. Nay is a proud Kamilaroi woman and holds the position of clinical nurse consultant for the Illawarra Shoalhaven Local Health District, specialising in sexual health and HIV. She helps coordinate the care for over 175 people living with HIV between Bulli and Ulladulla, conducting sexually transmitted infection testing and treatment, as well as HIV testing and contact tracing. Nay also works to educate the wider community to remove stigma that's associated with HIV. So they're just the brief bios. So can you imagine how amazing this is going to get when we get into you being able to share your own stories? So before we get into talking about your work and experiences, I would like to hear your own individual stories and allow you this time an opportunity to open up and share your connection to HIV in a way that you feel comfortable to do so. We often refer to this story sharing and this collective discussion as talking about our coordinates of belonging. So the coordinates of belonging are a sense of who we are as an individual, what makes us us, and the journeys that has led us to where we are today. to get a full understanding of this concept, we do invite listeners, if you haven't already, to go back and listen to our episode with Danielle May Camplin on connection to community. But yeah, without further ado, I'd love to first start with yourself, Tash. So over to you.
I get thrown in the deep end.
You get to go first. Lead the way.
About 10 minutes, wrap it up.
Yep, ish. Yep, that'd be great.
Okay.
Thanks, Tash.
Okay. I before ending up in Sydney, I'm originally from Perth, but for 12 years I worked at a Catholic school in Thailand. I only planned on going there for 6 months, and after the honeymoon period was over, I did meet someone. We settled down together, and we had a nice probably together for 7 years. One morning, we woke up, and my other half, I just thought it was another hangover because there's quite a big drinking culture in Thailand, and I had to get ready and go to work, and so I got dressed and off I went, and when I got home, she was still in bed. Anyway, this day one went to day two, and day three, she's not doing much, and I was just shirty because I just thought, what's going on here? It was that following morning I woke up, and it looked like she was rather small in stature before that, but it looked like she'd lost half her body weight overnight. I was aware, this is outside of Bangkok, that there was quite a bit of HIV and around out in the area I lived. But just one look at her, and I just sort of realized, I knew what it was. And of course, if she was going to be HIV positive, it was going to be a given that I was going to be positive too. Cut a long story short, I took her to a local hospital, came back, and we'd both actually missed HIV completely and gone to late stage of having AIDS. I remember hearing of someone once that, AIDS, as opposed to HIV, was referred to as a designer disease. And, this I found to be the case because it tend to attack your vulnerabilities. For my other half, it attacked her kidneys and liver. For me, it attacked my lungs. So we were at a stage where that's right, no hospital in Bangkok surrounding area would take her in. So I reluctantly sent her back to her hometown, northeast of Thailand, where she went straight into hospital, and I was in a hospital on the outskirts of Bangkok. Both of us in intensive care, dying of AIDS-related comorbidities. Unlike today, where the moment you get a diagnosis, you go straight onto treatment. That wasn't to be the case. Within 3 months, my other half had died. I was released from hospital. My lungs are and still are scarred from pneumococcal pneumonia, and with that I also had shingles, had brain encephalitis, and my weight had dropped to 43 kilos at the time as well. So I had to learn to walk again. At that point, I was given 3 months to live, and still I wasn't on treatment, by the way. I was getting out of associated things with just weird rashes, sores, shingles. Shingles is very painful. I've just had my first shot for being immunized against that again. And when you're given that time out, you just go off and do all the things that you've always wanted to do. And that's what I did. 3 months came along. I learned to walk in. I couldn't stand being at home anymore, so I went back on light duties at work, only sitting in the office. And then that's why I finally started medication. Now, that time in 2008, we weren't getting the good meds in Thailand still. And I was on, remember AZT?
Mm.
Yeah, that's what I was on. And the side effects were horrific. And basically, any instructions I got with the medication was, here, take this. And so I had to do a lot of research online to find out what the side effects were, and there were some shocking side effects. Gradually, I got better. I ended up finding out that in town, the Red Cross actually ran a group for expats that were HIV positive living in Thailand. And it wasn't until I came back to Australia that I realised, Albion Centre here in Surrey Hills?
Yeah.
Yeah. They fund or support the program in Bangkok. And it's like, when I came back here, I went back to Perth just expecting I was going to go back into secondary high school teaching. Well, that never happened. But then, I've ended up here, and then I realised the association with the Bangkok group. And they put me on other new anti-retros at the time. I sort of continued on. Even when my other half died, I was still not well enough to travel to her interment in the temple up in the northeast of Thailand. So I didn't actually get to go up and see her or any of her family for probably 5 months afterwards. And I did that, and I got better and fitter, and I just continued on it. But jobs and careers, like everything in life, that they have a life of their own. It comes time to move on. So I did a reconnaissance trip back here. Just to cover all my dots. I just thought I'd slip back into a teaching job in Perth. And if that didn't work out, I'd found out that I qualified. This is 2012 now. That I qualified for the DSP should, the proverbial hit the fan. And so, got rid of what I didn't need. Packed up into a shipping container what I wanted to keep and bring back, and arrived back in Perth. And life went south. My family actually moved to Melbourne when I was a lot younger, and when you're diagnosed with HIV, this is how I looked at it. I had a priority list of people I would tell from. Who do I need to tell? Who do I go down the pecking order and leave it till last? And the strange thing I found out about was my immediate family, brother and sister. Well, they just thought the whole transgender thing and the HIV, I just done it all just to upset their lives.
Mm.
And so, yeah, it was a bad period. And you sort of wonder, like, I had a little bit of a homeless stretch in Melbourne for a while too. And I'm just thinking, I've got, qualifications, really good ones, and I just can't get a teaching gig anywhere. It was always between the man, the woman, and moi. Your qualifications are great, but and I always knew what the but was all about.
Mm.
I ended up hooking up with another trans woman from the corporate world. She had a place here in Sydney, and just when we struck up a relationship online, and ended up moving up here and into her place, and that was good. That lasted for about 3 years. in 2014, 2015, yeah, I moved into my little abode here in Surrey Hills. Um, and I still have, I can be guaranteed, the wheels on the trolley health-wise will get wobbly once here. I've had viral brain infections, just weird things happen. So I found Puzzle Life New South Wales. They must have seen something in me and got me brought up to speed for doing these speaking gigs, which I still love going out to the schools and getting up in front of the kids, and their supervising teachers could go, look, if they're going to give you any hassles, let us know. And I go, I've got this.
Qualified teacher in the house.
Yeah. No, I've still got the class management down pat. So I really enjoy them and the teaching. So, I've sort of carved out a nice little niche for me here. Like there was a trans clinic established in Albion Centre, T90.
T150?
Aha, that's the
Yeah.
one. Yes. Yeah, and I was on one of these on the steering committee setting that up. And it's a woman, Bella Busby. She ran the first trans study out of Post Life as well. And I was well involved with that because I'd done co-presentations with ACON, and people are blurting out numbers, and I go, there isn't any numbers, there isn't any stats. And of course I get the reply, yes, sir. And I go, well, point me to them or send them to me. And of course there wasn't, never was until several years ago. And it's just my life sort of has revolved around being HIV. And one of the things about it was, the fact that I'm still here is I find just quite amazing at all. I always thought of HIV being positive as I wouldn't wish it on my dead enemy, and that's part of the reason I've always chosen to do these talks, just so I can get someone to second guess their behavior in the bedroom. And some of the comments and views I've heard from people, they still make my head spin when I hear some of the things said. But the thing is, like, my whole life just seems to revolve around being HIV positive. And that's one of the reasons I've decided to give the board a break. And I'll keep doing these talks till the cows come home. But it's just being HIV positive, my whole life revolves around it. And I was quite happy being celibate for 7 years because of the fact that I wasn't undetectable. And then I become undetectable, I think it was 2017, 2018. Did that put a spanner in the works? So that just, open up vistas of life that I had been close to me by choice for several years. And that was another adjustment. But I sort of, I'm undetectable. I have an okay sex life, I'm happily single because I just think it'd be too damn difficult for anyone to live with, to be honest. And life's pretty good. I think I've adapted to it quite well. Just in reference to disclosing my status to people, the last person I told was my ex-teaching colleague in Perth. He's ex-army, and he's pretty rough. So and when I told him, he just looked at me and went, so you're a tranny and you got AIDS? I went, well, I wouldn't put it like that, but yeah. And he went, okay. And it just sort of goes to show, you just don't know what people's reactions are going to be. I think I've only ever had one bad reaction. And the most positive reaction thing I think I ever did was I appeared on an episode of that You Can't Ask That on ABC TV.
Yep.
Um, it was a leap of faith on my part. And I always know when it's been repeated back onto me, because inevitably I'll be getting off the tram in town or something, and someone will just come up to me and go, "Hey, was that you?" And
Get
I've
messages,
never
fandom.
had a bad reaction. So, and it just goes to show my immediate family, problematic. Complete strangers, not at all. All right, I think if there's anything else we can touch on, you probably can ask me that as questions or whatever during.
Absolutely. You've already made some great comments that will link back into some of the stuff that we're going to discuss. But thank you so
Yeah.
much, Tasha. We really appreciate you sharing that story and journey and, the fact that you're out there advocating, but that at the heart of it all, you just want to educate and empower others. I think that's, incredibly strong and important. And we thank you for the work that you're doing in this space.
Okay.
Mel, I'd like to hand over to you, if that's okay. Would you like to share a little bit of your story with us?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. So my name's Mel. As Naomi said before, I'm of African descent. I've been living in Australia for 11 years, and I was diagnosed with living with HIV 10 years ago. So that could have been devastating, but I think I've turned it into a positive. When I first was diagnosed, I thought my life was over, as maybe many people go through those kind of emotions when they're told about something like this. So when the doctor told me, I thought, oh my gosh, I've got 2 young kids. I'm in Australia. I've only been here for a year. What am I going to do? So my first thought was like, yep, it's done. I've got nothing else to live for. But I turned it into a positive. So as you mentioned before, I am a speaker on the Positive Life Speakers Bureau with Positive Life New South Wales. And I'm also, like Tasha, on the board. So this is my second year on the board. And I think it's important to have somebody like myself on the board. And like you mentioned in my bio, I'd like to make a difference with especially young women living with HIV, especially heterosexual women and beautiful Black women, because I don't think there's a lot of representation of us Black women out there. So through these speaking engagements, I'm hoping that I can touch at least just one person from the CALD community. But my story, it really started 10 years ago in Australia with my HIV journey. I remember feeling unwell. And thought, okay, I don't feel really well. I feel like I've been sick for a while. I'll just go into a local GP in the city. I worked in Sydney CBD at the time. I thought I'll just go in and let this random doctor know I'm not feeling good. And I just wanted to do some testing. She asked me the regular questions, family history and so on. What are you experiencing? And I told her what I was feeling. At the time, I felt like I had fevers. I had ulcers in the mouth. All those different things that you read about that most people with HIV have in the beginning. So never once did she talk about it in the beginning. It was, what's your family history? So you spoke about diabetes. How are you feeling? Da, 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 da. Then she spoke about how she wanted to do some tests. So she said, we'll do a full body, full blood work. We'll do some urine tests. Have you had unprotected sex? And I said, yeah, I have. She's like, yep, we'll do STD check. Again, at this point, no HIV was brought up. Also, I will add that I was very oblivious to even maybe having it. I thought, oh, well, it won't be me. I'm a young girl. That can't happen to me. No way. No. I'm supposed to be educated in it. So it's not going to happen to me. But I didn't give it one thought, though. So she said all the tests she was going to do. I told her how I was feeling. I went through all the motions of getting Medicaid, da-da-da-da. And just as I was getting up out of my seat to go out the door and thank her, and she thanked me, she said, oh, by the way, do you want me to throw in a hepatitis and HIV test for you? Just like, oh, nothing's going to happen, but I'll throw it in there like a lucky dip. And I, again, didn't think anything of it and said, yeah, sure. I mean, you have my blood anyway. Go for it. Great. Walked out of the doctor's surgery, still not feeling really well, but didn't even think about the fact that she asked me if I wanted to do the test and that I agreed to it. Went about my business. A couple of days later, I got a call from the doctor saying, we've received your test results for everything. However, one of your test results has come back as inconclusive or just we're not really sure what's happening with it. I said, which one is it for? And the first thing I thought was like, oh my gosh, is she about to tell me I'm pregnant? Because this has happened to me before. The worst in my head was that I was pregnant, not that I was going to be HIV positive. But then she had said, look, it's your HIV test. It's come back a bit inconclusive. We're just going to run a few more tests. And I didn't know what that meant. And I was like, oh, okay. Do I need to be concerned? She said, no need to be concerned. I see this a lot. It's probably going to be negative. her key words was that it was probably going to be negative. Remember,
Mm.
she's a doctor, you trust doctors. And I left that conversation like, okay, cool, she's a doctor, I'm going to trust her, but obviously very nervous as well. So she said, I'll call you back once we have all the results, which would have included the HIV result. Anyway, went about my next few days, and then I got a phone call from her again 2 days later. We need you to come into the office. Now, my first reaction was like, again, honestly, she's probably going to tell me they found out I'm pregnant or something's going on here. Because the reason why I go to that is like I've got 2 kids, and every time I've gone to the doctor, it's like, oh, you're pregnant. So there's a bit of a backstory with that. But I thought, oh my gosh, she's about to tell me I'm having another baby in Australia. And I pleaded with her and I said, I'm at work. Is there any way you can give me the results over the phone? This was before COVID, where you could actually get results over the phone. Now you couldn't back then. And I said, please, I am at work. Is there any way you can just tell me? I'll pop into a quiet room, just please give me the results, whatever you need to tell me. No, I have to see you in person. Okay, that's fine. I said to my manager, I need to go into the doctor. It's just around the corner from where I worked at the time in the city. I remember going into her room. She sat me down, and she went through all the results. And in my head, I was like, just cut to the chase, please. She's like, you don't have diabetes. Your thyroid is fine. Your iron is great. You have no chlamydia, blah, blah, blah. But I am diagnosing you with HIV. So you're HIV positive. And I think my reaction was like, no. Check your records. That's not me. And she said, yes, it's you. And I just remember feeling really numb. I think I had young knees back then. I dropped to my knees and I was just crying and sobbing, just like, oh my word, my life is over. That's what I said before. I thought, oh my gosh, there's nothing else for me in this world. HIV, oh my gosh, it's done. But then I picked myself up and she said to me, I'm going to refer you to St. Vincent's Hospital. You'll be fine. Don't worry. And that was it. Okay. I left thinking, okay, great. I'm going to be referred to a specialist, but there was no real empathy from that doctor. What I remember from that conversation, there was no, there's foundations out there or people out there that will be able to support you. And this is the reason why you're going to live a long life. We've got medications available now. It's not like back in the day. There was no education for me at that spot. And she had a really vulnerable woman in me, crying out for like, tell me I'm going to be okay. And her only phrase was, you're going to be okay. I'm referring you to IBAC, at St. Vincent's. Next patient, please. So there was a missed opportunity there. But I remember going home. I told my family straight away. We're a very close family. I told them straight away, and my parents were very supportive. I had then seen my specialist, I think a week later, and I started my medication. I then started seeing a psychologist as well, and I started feeling like, okay, life is going to be good, because that's when I then got all my education and support as well through my specialist and a psychologist. I was told, about all the things I needed to know. All my questions were addressed, and then I want to say about 9 months later, roughly, I was then told that I was undetectable. And just like Tash, when I found that out, at first I was like, what is that? But then I was like, whoa, this is a game changer for me. I'm going to live a long life. And not only that, I'm going to be able to see my kids grow up. I might be able to be, a support for somebody else out there one day. So that's when I really started living, I want to say, because before that, I was just like, no, I can't do this. So in the last few years, I've really turned it into a positive, I believe. Through my speaking and being on the board, like I mentioned before. And I'm also a member of Positive Life. And I think the sense of community that Positive Life brings me is unreal. I'm so blessed to have found what I call my tribe in Positive Life. So yeah, that's a little bit about my story, and happy to share a little bit more later on.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mel. Really appreciate it. And the fact that you're both on the board just really speaks volumes to how, as you've said, you're taking that situation where both of you have legitimately feared for your life, and you're like, I'm still here, I'm still fighting, and I'm going to fight really hard to advocate. So thank you both so much. Nay, over to you, just from that clinical perspective. We know that you've been working with HIV positive clients for well over a decade now. Do you have anything else that you would like to add or let us know about your experience in the field?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, you're right, Naomi. I sort of come from that clinical perspective. I was drawn to HIV and sexual health nursing as I was able to spend time with my patients, like actually getting to know them, building a rapport, building a relationship with them, which is very different to hospital nursing.
Mhm.
And then when I got there and I saw how so many of my patients were from minorities or socially ostracized groups, I found it was really rewarding for me personally to be able to provide a safe space for them to come and get care. And I loved getting to know all my patients, and that's sort of I've stayed in it ever since. Um, so in terms of my role, it's a lot of support, testing, treatment, discussing treatment options with people, some injectable HIV treatment administration. I also support women through antenatal appointments if they want me to attend with them. Sometimes they're a bit nervous about that experience, so I've done that as well. I also provide a bit of education on HIV to other clinicians like hospital staff. I've done a couple of visits to aged care facilities if they take on somebody in the aged care facility that's living with HIV and they don't really know anything about it. I've gone out and done a bit of education. But I've also seen the cultural challenges associated with HIV for my Aboriginal community. And whilst the current rates aren't particularly higher for Aboriginal people living with HIV, I find they experience more challenges with staying connected to care, dealing with that cultural stigma. So I'm very passionate about HIV services providing the best culturally appropriate care for Aboriginal people, and also hoping to spread that word to other HIV services about using different ways of care. We don't always have to use the Western model of
Mm.
healthcare. We can always be flexible. So yeah, that's sort of what I do and my connection here today.
Perfect, thank you. So, into some questions now after sharing those journeys, which is just, yeah, again, thank you so much. It is sort of hard to know where to begin, but I think in a lot of these discussions, starting with some data is a really good discussion point. And Tasha, you've already touched on this and going, well, show me the data. Like you say, the data's out there, show me it. I do want to say that in today's discussion, when we refer to women and HIV, we are talking inclusively of trans women and
Sure.
persons with a uterus. But as you will learn, the data is not as inclusive as we are here at Caddyshack Project, and the data is not necessarily indicative of the wider inclusivity, and we need to be mindful of that when talking about data. We can't rely on data to provide us with 100% of the painted picture when it comes to women living with HIV in Australia. So, do we know roughly how many women and female identifying people are living with HIV in Australia?
Are you asking me?
Anyone, if you've got the data, throw it out there for us.
Mel, this is really more up your alley. You go to Pos Hets, don't you?
I do. I don't know the exact figure, but I know that with heterosexual women, it is on the rise at the moment, is what I've been told.
Yeah, yeah. What the information I've gleaned is that heterosexual women are the most at risk group or at the most diagnosed group at this time. The gay population had this figured out for years. Trans women or transgender people, we're barely a blip on the radar. So yeah, so I think that focus being on cisgender heterosexual women is probably where the focus should be at, as well as other minorities as well.
Yeah, that's awesome, Tasha. So I do have some data from NAPWA, which is the National Advocacy Group of people living with HIV/AIDS. And so they suggest that there's approximately 3,000 women living with HIV in Australia, which makes up roughly 10% of the fuller picture of people living with HIV in Australia. And you've hit the nail on the head, Tash, in terms of predominantly in Australia, it is men who have sex with men. This is not the story globally, however. Globally, worldwide, there are more women and children living with HIV. And I think that often we forget that. And that's why we did want to have a focus of women and HIV for this year, Caddyshack World AIDS Day webinar, because, yeah, the same story isn't here in Australia as it is globally. So it's also estimated that there's probably another 400 to 500 more women living with HIV who are currently undiagnosed. So you've already touched on a little bit of this, but in terms of the data, like what are the issues or limitations in collecting that data? What assumptions are being made by people in the research or trying to get the data around women living with HIV?
I think Mel nailed it on the head earlier on. The assumption being that, like, if you're just a straight woman going in for a test, as Mel did, on the whole, you won't be offered a HIV test. Because what the only women reading HIV tests are obviously sex workers and drug users, and unless you're obviously if you don't identify as one of them, or you to your medical practitioner appear to be one, you won't get a HIV test. So that's why I think diagnosis quite often goes under the radar for women.
Is that your experience from the clinical setting, Nay, and having worked in like those primary healthcare settings? So we know that the sexual health clinics and publicly funded sexual health services are probably more inclined to do that regular testing. But how about primary healthcare? Is that kind of true of those statistics, what Tasha's just said?
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with what Tasha says. We do see that with HIV testing that there seems to be misconceptions that exist in the medical field in relation to who needs a HIV test and who doesn't. I also get a lot of patients coming in from hospitals that present with STI-based symptoms, even chlamydia, gonorrhea symptoms, and for some reason they seem to get every test but a HIV test. So it definitely is a problem out there that that does exist in general practice in hospitals, healthcare providers, misconceptions about who needs a test and who doesn't.
And from that clinical perspective, I guess that's meaning later diagnoses of women. And so, as you've already touched on, Tasha, as well, your experience of being quite unwell by the time that you're diagnosed with HIV. What do we do about that gap, Nay? Like, how do we, encourage that testing in the earlier stages?
Yeah, that's a really hard thing. There's a lot of information. There's education for clinicians that is available through ASHM. So I'm sure they'll put the link in here. So for clinicians that are out there, being aware, there's misconceptions as well around people think that there's a big form that has to be completed that a patient has to sign for a HIV test. That's a misconception that still exists in many hospitals. And so just being educated yourself. So if you are a clinician, having a look, that stuff's not required, explaining to the patient, offering the test, it's very straightforward. I think that is all part of it. I'd probably like to see some more education sort of with healthcare providers and their own education in the medical profession when they're going through medical school. A bit more knowledge about HIV would be really nice to see that from the beginning, so that when they get out into the field, they're more aware and more informed. But some of these things, it takes time. Yeah, I'd like to see more work done in that space. But if there's any clinicians on and you're not sure about this, check out the ASHM website. They have a lot of great information for clinicians on how to offer testing and things like that.
Excellent advice. Tasha, did you have something you want to add then?
Look, I sort of feel in respect to women in general, I get the same feelings that I had when I was trying to get something done about trans health. You just banging your head against the wall constantly, just trying to get someone to listen to you, and I'm in a minority of minorities, but I'd like to think that I've contributed something to getting towards testing and recognition and a number on the page, so to speak, as far as trans women go. But and also I think also just general get sexual health checks, as I always point out to schools I talk at, it's not like going to your local GP. In fact, you don't have to go to your local GP. You can just go to your local sexual health clinic, and you don't need to produce a Medicare card, and it's anonymous, and your parents won't find out if you've got something, and it's and quite often the fear of the testing is bigger than the test itself.
That's a great point. Mel, you were going to add something?
I was just going to say, it's also with advertising, I don't see a lot of, like, well, I live in Western Sydney, right? I don't see anywhere here where there's something that says get tested, that HIV there. But if you go into the city, there's what they call the gay postcodes. There's everything out there for our gay and bisexual brothers
Yeah.
out there. So it begins with the media as well, So if there's more of that in schools, maybe, how wonderful it would be to see a billboard, have you been tested? Just driving down these suburbs as well. So I think the focus also needs to be that we need to cater for everyone in Australia, not certain suburbs only, where, in Sydney, they are getting tested. So we don't need that much, I suppose, advertising there, whereas out here where I am, and that's when you said there's a lot of people that are undiagnosed. Maybe they just don't even think about it, but they may if they see somebody represent somebody on a billboard, let's just say, for example, representing what they look like from the CALD community, about getting tested. And I agree with Naomi, though. It also starts with the doctors and nurses speaking about it more, not just assuming because I'm a heterosexual person or woman that I'm not going to have HIV, because HIV doesn't have a face. It could be anyone. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so eloquently said, Mel. We often say that we're like, HIV as a virus doesn't discriminate, people do. And that's the biggest issue when it comes to the stigma and discrimination that's still faced by HIV positive people. But it's like, at the end of the day, the virus doesn't discriminate, and it could be any one of us at any particular time. So that moves us nicely into the next little section discussing the gender difference in HIV. And I guess, Nay, I'll throw to you first. Whilst the virus is transmitted the same way, regardless of gender, the impacts, but also the testing, as we've already discussed, and treatment can be vastly different. What are some of the considerations for women with HIV when it comes to those differences?
Yeah, so from sort of like a healthcare perspective, we definitely consider for cisgender women or people with a uterus around pregnancy, if they're pregnancy planning, that may affect what medications we're going to recommend for them. So we know that with HIV, the individual will take their medication, and that will then stop the virus from transmitting to the baby, so the baby can be born totally fine, which is great. So, for example, we do have the new injectable HIV treatment. It's been quite popular for discretion, but there's not a lot of research into the use of that for people who are pregnant. So that's when sometimes we can have to consider that. We also know for cisgender women living with HIV, there's some research that suggests they experience an earlier menopause, which can have more symptoms. So we know as well that some of the HIV treatments can affect bone health. So we kind of need to weigh that up when we get into women as they age, thinking about their bone health, thinking about menopause as well, which is stuff that the fellas are lucky enough not to worry about. And we also know in terms of sort of socially, um, in Australia, the gay male community is a bit more familiar with HIV. And so at times for women, I've seen there's been challenges with their friends or their partners not understanding HIV, or they have a low level of health knowledge, and they deal with a bit more stigma. And that then it means it's become their job, I suppose, to educate their partners and educate all their friends. And that can be really tiring for people. But I'm sure Mel and Tasha could talk more to that. They may also not know other people living with HIV, unless they engage in sort of these other groups like Positive Life and stuff like that. They may not know others, and so it can be really isolating for them, I find, in comparison to other cohorts. I'm from a regional area here, and so all my women in my that I help look after here, they're all extremely secretive about their diagnosis. I had one lady that was just changing pharmacies, and she would just drive past. Then she'd just buy like Panadol, and then she'd just get her cholesterol medication, like just sussing out the pharmacy to decide if she wanted to use that pharmacy. So, they can be, some of them don't want their children to know about their diagnosis, and they're worried about the future with aged care. If, will my children come to know about my diagnosis later in life? I've also been involved in supporting women in circumstances where ridiculously somehow their HIV status has been brought up around child custody arrangements, which is absolutely ridiculous. So I've helped support women through that. And just one more medical thing is, for those not familiar with PrEP, there's a daily pill to prevent HIV. Women and people with a uterus need to take it daily to be effective, whereas others do have some little more options in terms of how to utilize PrEP. However, same with HIV testing. Sometimes clinicians who prescribe PrEP can just overlook women as people, no, they don't need this, they won't benefit. So that can create challenges for people to access PrEP. So I think those are the main things I'd touch on from a healthcare perspective for women.
Excellent. Thanks, Nay. That was really comprehensive. And I'd like to turn over to yourselves, Mel and Tasha, if there's anything that you'd like to add around this. I mean, both of you have self-identified as having multiple minorities. And do you feel like presenting as a woman to healthcare services with those multiple minorities has impacted, say, your treatment or your care differently from other people who may be living with HIV?
Yeah, for me, it's sometimes the assumption
Mel,
that,
do you want to go first?
yeah, a lot of doctors assume that I acquired HIV in Africa because I'm from a country in Africa that has one of the biggest populations of people living with HIV. And I have to then say to them, I've got it in Australia. And then I sometimes find myself having to educate them as well. And I always wonder, and I've actually asked some of my gay friends, have you ever been asked how you got HIV? A lot of the time.
How did you
But
get it? That's so bad.
yeah, as a woman, there's this curiosity about my HIV. When you're the doctor, I shouldn't have to educate you. There's only a few ways that you would acquire HIV. I don't have to take you through all the ways. I'm standing more firm now in my power, where I take it away from them, because sometimes they'll make me feel like I have to tell them. But coming back to it, I think the major thing for me as a woman living with HIV is the discrimination. Sometimes we get from doctors, sometimes we don't, but dating is annoying because you almost have to have it stamped on your face, you equals you, and educate people about that. Or I'm undetectable, I can still be valued. The HIV is a small part of me. My medication is, I've had a journey with medication. I'm really blessed to be able to live in Australia where my medication is free. I'm able to access it really easily, but I know for some people in Australia that is not the case. Some people live rurally, some people can't get to the doctor to get a prescription, and then some people may or may not have to pay for it. So I feel really lucky, but I wish there was more work and more talks about discriminating against women living with HIV. As a gay man, maybe saying I have it, maybe the perception is just, oh, they're gay, but no, they have their own story as well. Like I have my own story, right? So yeah, that's kind of, I hope that kind of touches the brief.
Yeah.
It does,
Now,
thanks.
just as a question, Mel, did you find that you had to, I'll call it doctor shopping for what it's worth, but to find a GP at least who you were comfortable with, who understood where you were coming from? Did you go through that process?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm lucky that I have a HIV specialist who understands. He's really well known in Sydney, but he understands it, never made me feel small at all. But in terms of GPs, I definitely felt like I had to shop around for a doctor that was going to, look at me as Mel, that I'm in there for a headache. I'm not in there to discuss my HIV. I'm in there for my throat. It's got nothing to do with my HIV. So yeah.
Yeah. Like I live in Surrey Hills, and it's a little insulated HIV bubble world. And I tend to go out west and do a lot of talks at schools out there or other organisations, and it's a different country. And you sort of realise, the challenges to people living outside the bubble that they have to go through just to cope with their HIV experience. Things that Naomi's touched on already. Like, well, even for me here, okay. Like I'm in Surrey Hills and I live in housing, but it's the assumption is, well, you're trans. Obviously, you've got to be a hooker and a drug addict as well because you're in housing, and it's just getting past those stereotypes at times that I find difficult. And my message is out there, but it does weigh you down a bit after a while.
Yeah. Absolutely. And like you said, I think just the fact that people are living off of that curiosity and the fact it's none of their damn business if it's not impacting on what you're presenting for. And there's a lesson from that, right? Like, let's drop the assumptions because that is what's leading to the stigma and discrimination more than anything. So, talking about assumptions, that moves us really nicely into this next section. So, we know that the campaigning since the start of the AIDS epidemic in the 80s has focused on men who have sex with men, and that it's very much overlooked women or person with uterus. So, we touched on the fact earlier that thankfully within the men who have sex with men community, we have seen a decline or at least a steadying of new diagnoses, but the new diagnoses are, at least somewhat increasing in women and people from multicultural communities, culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, non-English speaking communities. And this does have to do with the campaigns and where the campaign material has been targeted. And you've already touched on the fact that, out west is very different, just in Sydney western suburbs as opposed to the city. And we can only imagine how that increases in accessibility as the geographical distancing becomes rural and remote. And, people are very mobile these days. We've got a lot of people making the sea change or the tree change and moving out of those city areas where the specialised services are. So if we could take a moment to talk about campaigns, I'd like to. ACON have worked really heavily in the campaign space around ending HIV in collaboration with New South Wales Health, and some of the campaigns have been quite meaty, I guess, in terms of the content and being targeted towards MSM. So the language that's been used or the imagery that's been used has been very targeted, and a lot of women have identified with the fact that they haven't identified with that campaign material at all, let alone somebody whose first language is not English. ACON have recently developed a campaign which is more targeted towards sexuality and gender diverse women called Word on the Sheets. And the campaign has been designed with the hope that, women become more familiar with HIV testing and the importance of general STI testing, and that the campaign material is a lot more gentle, shall we say. There's a lot more purple colour used than in the Ending HIV campaign. But Tasha and Mel, if you feel comfortable to share with us, have you ever seen any campaign material in regards to HIV or testing where you've gone, I can see myself represented in that, like I actually relate to that campaign material? Can you think of an instance, or where you haven't felt related, so it's like, I don't belong here, or this isn't me?
Mel, do you have?
In terms of campaigns, not so much, but I will say the U equals U, we see that everywhere. But it's also a little bit problematic because for some people, they don't even know what that means. Untransmissible equals, undetectable equals untransmissible. Some people will never be able to be achieving the undetectable as well. So that could be a problem in itself. And what does untransmissible mean? So I think that there's certain campaigns like that they probably need to make a bit more broader and think about the whole community, not just for the people that might be more educated in the space. In terms of campaigns, and I would just maybe touch on more media that I see that where I have somebody like myself represented. I think companies like Positive Life, and there's many more as well, they do a really good job with putting people out there that represents people that look like me. I'm from many minorities. I'm heterosexual, I'm Black, and I'm a woman. Okay, it's nice to see somebody like me represented. So yeah, I don't see that many campaigns, but again, I think it's also because of where I live. Maybe if I lived in the inner city, I'd probably see more. I do remember one time, though, I told somebody the story. I said, when I first went into my specialist clinic at IVAC in St. Vincent's, I looked around as a young woman, first newly diagnosed. I looked around the room and I was like, wow, am I going to be alone? I thought I was one of the only women living in Australia, because all that I saw was campaigns and, yoga groups and walking sessions for gay and bisexual men living with HIV. So what missed opportunities we might have for people like myself out there. But I have seen the campaign that you talk about from ACON. I really like the idea.
Perfect. Anything else you'd like to add to that, Tasha?
When I was at high school, I had to do a woodwork class. I hated every minute of it. But the one takeaway I took, and this was the woodwork teacher referring to a bad piece of wood. And he said, if there's a feature in the wood, if you can't hide it, make a feature of it. And that saying always stuck with me. So one day, just as a revelation, it sort of came to me that, hang on, wait a minute. HIV is this much of me, right? And if you are ignorant or don't understand it or don't want to understand it, that's your issue, not mine. And that was sort of a liberating experience for me. And from that, like Gilead Pharmaceuticals, who do the HIV meds, I do promotional work for them as well. I'm so out there, HIV. It's I couldn't even be in the closet if I wanted to be.
And nor should you have to be.
I've made it work for me, and I feel I'm comfortable in myself enough now. I mean, you've got the trans one hand and you've got the HIV, and I'm good with both of them. And if you don't understand or you don't understand, that's the issue is on you. I'm happy to educate you on it, but leave your assumptions at the door, please.
Heck yes to everything you just said. You go. You get this. Both of you have spoken about accessing services, and particularly when you were newly diagnosed, some were beneficial and helpful, others perhaps not so. Do you feel comfortable sharing with us how you came to know about these HIV support services and perhaps how it is that they assisted? So some HIV positive people when newly diagnosed might reach out in terms of that peer support or that social connection that we've heard about, others for medical support, financial support, or that emotional support. Would you like to share with us some of those services and that experience?
Yeah, Tasha, do you want to go?
Oh, look, that's just a minefield on its own. Like, okay, I mentioned earlier when I was talking a little bit about myself, how I thought I could get the pension if things went wrong when I moved back to Australia. I did that trip at the end of 2011. In February of 2012, when I came back, they changed the legislation, the government did. So I didn't qualify for it at all. And so when I came back to Australia, not only was I living on unemployment benefits, and I was still suffering from comorbidities to AIDS. The tax department lumbered thousands of dollars on me for not paying tax, and it all got sorted. But it's just navigating my way through that whole messy area, and then not especially if you do not have a stable place to live. What is it called? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I think housing is at the top. You don't have that. Everything else is just in the wind. And as I did it for like a year and a half, it was just a nightmare, just trying to navigate my way through government departments and whatever else. And I remember I think I was on my third review for getting the pension, and one of the comments was, "Oh, you look." This is a woman on the panel at Central. She goes, "Well, you look fine to me." Okay. How do you know I'm fine? So it can be one fraught with issue, but I think once again, I think it comes down to the individual, because I'm just so comfortable living with HIV now, and I have made this faux pas before. I'm quite happy talking about myself, and I assume, which I think we all know, the associated saying when you assume things, that other people are comfortable or not, and you're not. It took me 7 years. 7 years just to come around to the fact that I'm HIV positive before I had my little epiphany. So, and that process of actually learning to live with HIV is one of the things I find so difficult. And I'll just close up with I think COVID really threw a spanner in the works for HIV testing and diagnosis. Well, it sort of just threw it to the background, so to speak. Like I've even heard comments from people from audiences I've done talks with. Everything was from, I didn't think that existed anymore. And that was a jaw dropper to me. And the fact that New South Wales Health change the way they collect their stats, where they don't actually, and correct me, Naomi, Naomi, if I'm wrong, that they don't actually count AIDS-related deaths as being AIDS-related deaths anymore. If you die of PCP pneumonia, well, that's what it is. If you die of something else, that's AIDS-related. But, AIDS-related illnesses don't get listed as such anymore. And I think that sort of leans on the stats as well for, further funding or whatever else.
And it's problematic
I'll stop
that
there.
those assumptions. Thanks, Tasha, but it's problematic
Yeah.
that those assumptions are out there too. Like, oh, does that still exist? Well, yeah, and we know that the testing rates are down, and we're trying to increase that. Mel, did you have anything that you'd like to say in regards to services and accessing that support?
Yeah, I wish I'd known about the support and services out there when I was newly diagnosed. I mean, it took me about 5 years before I started connecting, until I found my peoples. What I said before, when I found Positive Life, it opened up my eyes to, wow, I'm not alone in this country, and obviously there's other services as well, but I speak highly of Positive Life because it's the only company that I am involved with. But I found some really good people through Positive Life. They offer many services. I personally see a psychologist as well, which has been instrumental on my journey. But yeah, I feel like I'm one of the lucky ones. I know the newly diagnosed people like myself, we have a different story to tell and a different journey. I always commend our brothers and sisters that were diagnosed with HIV back in the 60s and 70s, that the journey that they had, support and services that they had, were nothing like what we have today. So I do feel like I'm one of the lucky ones, and where I do see opportunities to share about my story, I do, and where I see an opportunity to thank them, I do. So I'd like to say that as well. I'm so grateful for the path that they walked, because the path that I walk is so different. But yeah, I feel like for myself, it's just my own journey. I've had really good services.
That's fantastic. And the three of you have spoken so much to the advocacy role. You are all amazing advocates for women living with HIV, and for that, we thank you. Is there one take-home message for our audience today in terms of this advocacy space and what we can be doing moving forward? Where do we need to shift our attention when it comes to women living with HIV?
I think talk about it more, assume less, and talk about it more, right? Like I said before, HIV doesn't have a race, a color, a smell, a look. HIV, anybody can get HIV. So talk about it more. I think sometimes with people in the medical field, it's also just having a little bit more empathy as well, I said this before, if somebody has cancer, the first reaction is, oh my gosh, I'm so sad. But when I say I have HIV, you see a bit of a distance, and sometimes you get that. Sometimes like, oh, and then the curiosity questions kick in. But the same empathy should be applied to both, right? Just know even though we have HIV, we still need to be afforded privacy, respect, and empathy.
Love it. Thank you, Mel. Very powerful words. Tasha.
Look, I'll keep doing these talks until the cows come home. Just until we're in a world where organisations like Positive Life or ACON don't have to exist, I'll just keep speaking to it, because governments come and go. Funding is always a constant fight. Awareness doesn't come about by silence. So, yeah, I mean, I'm pretty visible, so and I can be loud. So it's just keep shouting, just keep talking to it, even when you think people aren't hearing. Someone will be listening.
Thank you, Tasha. Very powerful. Nay, do you have any final words in terms of advocacy and focusing our attention in this space?
Yeah, I really can echo Mel's words about talking about it more, being more aware, especially from a healthcare standpoint, and not making assumptions. It's always assumptions that cause problems. Not offering testing or not offering PrEP or not thinking about testing, all these things are massive problems from a healthcare perspective that as healthcare workers we need to keep in mind. To any healthcare workers dialing in. So, that's where I think it needs to go, and, the potential, increasing PrEP offering PrEP and uptake of PrEP is also really important as well for the future. But that's my 2 cents on a healthcare perspective.
Well, thank you so much, Nay, for that contribution. And on behalf of Caddyshack Project, Mel, Tasha, and Nay, we thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I know that our audience online, there's comments coming up through the chat box, but taken so much from it. And thank you for being that voice for community and making sure that women are heard on their HIV journeys. And let's hope that you never stop talking. We're so grateful for you being out there in community and on the Positive Speakers Bureau. So please don't ever stop. Thank you so much for your contribution this afternoon, and we look forward to continuing to follow the work that you are doing in this space. We can't miss the opportunity to promote World AIDS Day, which is just around the corner in a few weeks' time on the 1st of December. It's the longest running health ribbon campaign that started in 1988 and recognises, as Mel mentioned, the people who have come before us in their HIV journeys and remembering those lost to AIDS. So should you wish to make a donation to ongoing research in HIV, supporting the lives of HIV positive people, these can be made through the Ribbon Appeal website. Just a reminder, it's also your last chance to enter our surfboard competition, the beautiful piece of work by Zach Bennett-Brooke at Saltwater Dreamtime. You can head over to caddyshackproject.com to enter that if you haven't already. And although it's not for a couple of months, I would like to make listeners aware of the National Day of Women Living with HIV, which is on March the 9th every year. So please pop that into your 2025 calendar. And yeah, remember the journeys and stories of women living with HIV too. We have popped our QR code on the screen. We really do love and appreciate your feedback. So thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. That does draw to a close the end of our On the Couch series for 2024. We thank you for being with us throughout the year, throughout our many varied webinars. Rest assured that planning is underway and we can't wait to bring you more great episodes in 2025. So thank you for your time this afternoon, everyone. A follow-up email with those links and resources mentioned throughout today's discussion will be sent out, and we'll add those to our show notes as well. So enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you so much, Nay, Tasha and Mel. We really love that you've taken the time to be with us on the couch today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.